Perfect. Great. So, thank you again for your talk, Syed ji. It was very, very insightful. We had a very extensive historical discussion, and because some technical, the last chat, the last live session had ended before we had anticipated the end. We had a number of questions that we have already asked. So I'm going to ask some of the questions that I have based on your talk, and these are more to do with the philosophical aspects and maybe some of the terminological issues as well. And my first question to you would be, I hope it's live already. It's live, great. Is it, and this is more of a question on terminology, because I think it comes from the West as to how we can define what Buddha has said in the suttas. Is it right to categorize this dialectic of Buddha as logic? Because as I understand it, Buddha has not mentioned this term in the suttas clearly. All he has mentioned is reasoning, or to say that you should think about things in a way that is not ignorant. But the term logic itself, or a term that is close to logic, maybe occurs much in a very different context. For example, in Nyaya philosophy, it occurs in the case of gaining hetu vidya, which is the vidya of reasoning via grounds, or it is to establish a conclusion when you are given a ground for a certain cause. So the context in which Buddha speaks about these things, does it exist, he doesn't exist, I'm not quite sure if it's helpful to think of it as logic, because when we think of it as logic, we are we are confining ourselves to this Western view of logic, where we have law of non-contradiction, law of mode exponents, and all these sort of binary categories. So to put Buddha's teachings that was said way back in 6th century BC, 5th century BC, and to put it in a modern Western philosophical context, uh, how justified would that be for you, Sage?
So this is a very, very crucial and important question. I thought that at some point, basically along the lecture, I will answer that, but I'm glad that you have brought that up. It's very important. Is it a logic? First. Secondly, like in what is basically we usually know basically that Anuman Tattva or like Hetu Vidya, like we got basically a particular sort of form of basically investigation we came across in like our tradition, and in compared to that, this is very unlikely like unfamiliar sort of stuff actually. So there are a number of ways of looking at it actually, and some of the people have started to reconcile that. Just to start with actually like question of logic. Logic has a very Greek connotation, study of word and other stuff actually. But the word never stays in a same sense. It changes over the period of time. So our current understanding of the word actually is that kind of a systematic study of reasoning, argument, pattern, form, alternatives. Especially after the 1930s, Lukasovich and then basically lots of other systems come up, that we came to know that basically that the Western mainstream classical logic, which kind of endorses like contradiction and excluded middle, we then basically come that basically that there could be like alternative systems, and Lukasovich come with basically like in between true and false there's a loss of infinite intervals. Then we kind of see basically in Brouwer's case that he kind of interested in rejecting basically law of like excluded middle actually, or proof by contradiction, this sort of argument. So, and then in West actually we kind of started to see lots of small and basically the particular sort of logic actually. So logic is not like, now people use two sort of one is capital logic and another is small logics. So capital logic is someone basically elite, which is like so-called classical, propositional and predicate calculus sort of a logic. And then we have basically lots of small logical system, which is important use. Like suppose this basically four alternative, it has a very interesting use in data processing, and some of the basically data scientists has used them actually, because some information you don't know truth or false, but some information could be partially true and false. So you have a lots of mechanism. So nowadays we have like different kind of logical system we are using for different purposes, and we have a wide range of logic. So our sense of logic is has a significantly changed. We are more of a pluralistic in this sort of cases actually. So if you ask me basically what is my take on these issues, I kind of being in basically Southeast Asian, even in our tradition we have lots of system of logics. So I'm kind of a pluralist in that account, and I think it makes more sense because the question comes to the very primary question: what would be the criteria to consider basically right form of reasoning from the wrong form of reasoning? That's one of the important. And then it would lead to us basically to fundamental question, whether basically excluded middle is right or wrong principle, or contradiction is right or wrong principle. That's a very primary and important question this leads to. There's a lot of discussion around that, and different people has a different account on that. So we kind of feel but the interesting thing is that when we debate about contradiction, like whether contradiction is the right principle or not, how to decide actually that it is right or not? Because we are basically, when we are having debated something else, we are using basically these two principles. But when we are debating on the very principle, how to justify them? That's a question of justification. So some people say these are transcendental stuff. So, but nowadays we know basically that none of them are transcendental. It's more often it's kind of a conventional. So some people basically use it as a convention, some group of people is. And now, because of the basically computer science and other stuff, actually you have small pocket of logic, small logics. It has a application. So we had a logic, considering some things as a logic, could be one different form of logic. It has a different utilities for different aspect of systems, for different knowledge system. And it could be basically developed for the purposes. But in case of coming back to the Chatushkoti, so is it a logic in that sense? Definitely it is a logic. But did early a Buddhist logician like Dignaga and Dharmaketri, who usually studied quite extensively Hetu Vidya, because in Southeast Asian region, we know basically Akaput Gautam's Nyaya Sutra, and then basically the whole debate started basically how to define Bhakti, like the relation between basically that Shraddha and Hetu. Just to give an context to the audience, is that if in Hetu Vidya, one of the concern actually, if it is a Shraddha Anuman, we will say basically that there is a fire in the a mountain because of there is a smoke. So the relation of the Shraddha and Hetu is the smoke, and the Shraddha is the fire. So this connection between basically Shraddha and Hetu is basically how to understand that. It's not a causal relation. It got to be some form of logical relationship. If it is causal relationship, then basically we end up getting into the basically more often ontological aspect. So there's a whole discussion from starting from the Akaput Gautam to basically Nobbono Yaik actually in 17th century Onambotto. There's a huge discussion and very much confined on the relationship Shraddha and Hetu, which is called Bhakti. Digna come up with some interesting criteria. Dharmakirti, Gongesh has criticized them and all sort of stuffs. So in many ways, basically that tradition in Southeast Asian tradition, Hetu Vidya has dominated in many ways. But at the same time, when we were doing philosophy, actually, we wanted to get in basically is just making in this sort of inference is not enough. You need lots of methodology to addressing lots of other people, isn't it? And to do that, we usually, what we do basically, this sort of diverse methodology come to a very fact, because we don't want to say basically who is saying Tathagata exists and Tathagata lives after death and doesn't live after death. We don't want to address only to this position. We want to address rest of the other positions. So then it's becoming very important. Another aspect of Chatushkoti is very important. We tend to appear to forget. In our tradition, we not only produced philosophy, we also produced a huge material on de-philosophization, which is called Vidarshana or the Vipassana and Vidarshan actually. So those who are familiar with this, early Buddhist stuff actually, is that Vidarshan is basically to basically showing that basically all these views are not right, and which is very much connected with the intellectual nirvana and other stuff. So Nagarjuna's philosophy wouldn't been possible without that basically the philosophy wasn't without being basically this Chatushkoti method. Otherwise, he have to buffle around these two positions, and that is what had happened in case of Wittgenstein. In the early Wittgenstein Tractatus, when he was trying to show that basically most of our philosophical problem is not a real problem, it's a pseudo problem, then end up getting basically making contradiction because he's making some philosophical like statement. So you need a different method, and especially like if Wittgenstein has known this Chatushkoti, he could have used better used. I don't know whether he was familiar, but there's a lot of research on that nowadays coming up. So like that could be an interesting use. So we need to, and I think like a large number of discussion is oriented on the philosophy. We get to less discussion on de-philosophization of de-philosophy. So we need to bring it down because this method kind of works pretty well. And that's how we also get another system, which is slightly later development is called Syed, like the Jainas, which is also giving you another tools of mechanism of arguing other stuff actually. So it has a like, if you want to do philosophy and de-philosophy, this sort of method has a very important significance. If you wanted to basically very confined form of like reasoning, then yeah, we might avoid that. If you want to do some sort of basically design, development software and other basically, then you might need this sort of stuffs actually. It can give you and also like if you are modeling some informal reasoning, our informal reasoning actually are very distinctive from the, and you will find very difficult to only by through the lenses of classical Western logic. Our informal, loss of part of informal reasoning wouldn't make sense because yet we consider loss of argument like acceptable, yet logically they might not be acceptable. So this sort of reasoning could help in this set of cases actually. So it has a like wider implication here. So just to sum up, because yes, it is a logical system. You might not see basically it's a capital L logic. Yeah, it could be a small logic, like small L logic. You can have lots of small logic actually if you are pluralist. So it's one of the logical system. Secondly, our tradition is highly confined with the discussion of like Hetubidya, Anuman, and Bhakti relationship. So, but some cases, some of them actually like use basically the debate which has only like two alternative. Like suppose in Kothabatu, you have a, like there are some cases in two example there are they are actually debating on four alternatives. And like debating not basically in the form of like what we see in the early Buddhist canons actually like asking and Buddha is responding. No, they are basically line of argumentation is going actually what we see actually in later development. So the line of argumentation going on hands and forward actually. So they are taking basically like the four alternative and they are debating on one by one. And even though basically if we look at basically that the different type of debates like basically like the Bath and Bitandra, and so Bitandra is more often connected with like what we kind of outcome of the addressing Nagarjuna actually, because who doesn't have any position, who is only criticizing other position. So here basically that we can see basically implicitly that Chatushkoti has been considered. Yeah. So there is a consideration actually in some cases, but the discussion in Hetubidya is highly focused on Vyapti.
Okay, great. This is on my question. Um, I have a number of questions, but probably I'll leave them to some other time because, in the interest of time, we'll have to close the session in the next few minutes. And I could, continue this chat with you privately after some time. It's already
Sure.
I think it's already about. I think it's already past 2:30. Maybe even I think it's 3 o'clock already in New Zealand. So
Yes, it
probably.
is. Yes.
And thank you very much, Sayedji, for this talk, for this lovely talk. Very interesting, very immersive, and giving a very broad overview of logic and development logic in the Buddhist tradition and developments around it. Well, we hope that the audience has benefited from this interaction in the last 1 hour. And I would like to thank Heritage Society and its organizers for organizing this wonderful talk. And we hope that we continue to have these talks on a regular basis. So to close off the session, thank you very much, Sayedji. Stop again.
And thanks a lot, Aditya, actually, and for your moderation, and also basically the organizer, actually, the Buddhist Heritage Research Institute for organizing that, and also basically that Dr. Anantashutosh and Mr. Azad actually for like
Yeah, thank
organizing
you,
that actually, and thanks to you actually, yeah.
and Azad ji and Syed ji for this wonderful conversation. So we would see you soon, sometime very soon. So good night, have a good night, and thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.